Good morning. Happy New Year. My name is Daniel. Some people call me Dinko. I am one of the pastors here at Kindred. So glad to be with you all. It is the first Sunday of the year, so glad you're spending that first Sunday in worship to the Lord. It's also the first Sunday of the month, which means, of course, we're partaking in communion in service, and then we're eating lunch together afterwards. It's like in service, we have our spiritual meal. Afterwards, we have our ordinary meal together as a church. Except today, it's not quite so ordinary because I was told it is, how do you say it? Korean rice cake soup downstairs after service today. It's kind of a traditional meal to eat in the new year. So please join us for that after service. We continue in 2 Samuel. We're back. I am so pleased that we're back in 2 Samuel. This is actually one of my favorite stories, if not my favorite story from 2 Samuel. Just to give you context, David is now well established as the king. God has given him his covenant. God has made his promises about his kingdom, that it will stand forever. And we know, of course, that culminates through Jesus Christ. And David has been having his victories, even in battle. And so it is a good time. And here's where we land in 2 Samuel 9. I'll read this for us. Let's give our attention and reverence, for this is the reading of God's holy word. And David said, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Remember, Saul was kind of a bitter enemy of David, but that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake, Saul's son. Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "I am your servant." And the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God to him?" Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." The king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "He is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Behold, I am your servant." And David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always." And Mephibosheth paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?" Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and all his house I have given to your master's grandson. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him, and shall bring in the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. So he has things to be concerned about, and he clearly has some influence and power. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now, remember, he was lame in both his feet. This is God's holy word. Can you remember a time when you were a kid, when you were young, and you did something wrong, you did something bad, and you're anticipating your parents are going to be so angry with you, and then shockingly, they're super kind and loving towards you? Have you experienced that? I know at least some of you have experienced that, maybe most of you. That is kind of like the story of Mephibosheth today. His story is truly remarkable. Like I said, one of my favorites. Because King David here is acting very unusually. Because it is the usual way for a king, once he's the new king, it's normal, it's usual, it's common for him to remove all opposition and also to remove all potential opposition. You could probably imagine why a king might do that, a new king, right? And Mephibosheth, he expects to be treated poorly by King David because Mephibosheth is of the house of Saul. the previous king, and even, once again, a bitter enemy to David. He expects to be treated poorly. Maybe even he might even expect to be killed. But here's David, not only sparing Mephibosheth's life, but showing kindness to him. Giving him, saying, I'm going to restore to you all the land and property of your grandfather. And you get to eat at my royal table like one of my sons from now on always. Even though technically he was his enemy. And this kindness that David shows Mephibosheth is a very special kind of kindness. We see actually this word repeated 3 times in our passage. And this word kindness here, it's a word that maybe if you've been in the church or studying the word for a while, you may have heard this Hebrew word before. I don't like to quote Hebrew words too much because usually pastors just use it to try to sound smart. But this is a word that I think is very special. This Hebrew word for kindness here is chesed. Chesed. You got to do the guttural sound. Chesed, right? And that word chesed can be translated as loving kindness, steadfast love, loyalty, faithfulness. And I want to actually focus on this last one, covenant love. Covenant love. David shows chesed to Mephibosheth, and it is a covenant love. You know, way back in 1 Samuel 20, David and Jonathan actually made a formal covenant with each other to be basically promising to be loyal to each other, even despite the fact that Jonathan was King Saul's son. He was on the opposing side. And of course, this relationship between David and Jonathan, it's not all business. We know this. We know they were like basically best friends, beyond best friends. They were so aligned, and they were so for each other. They had great love for each other. And they actually formalized that friendship through the making of a covenant. It's kind of like a blood oath. You guys ever heard of a blood oath? I don't think in our culture today many people make blood oaths. Closest thing probably is like the mafia. If any of you ever joined the mafia, you're going to make a blood oath. You actually have to cut your hand and blood comes out, and you're making a promise of your relationship to this group, right? I think the closest thing I could think of growing up, at least, was a spit shake. You guys remember spit shakes? You spit on your hand and you shake. Both of you have to spit on your hand and you shake. And that means, like, our relationship is strong. This is a very serious relationship, right? Very serious friendship, very serious expectations and oaths and bonds. That's what David and Jonathan did. And all this to say, it makes sense to translate this kind of more broad word, kindness, as the specific word, covenant love. That's what David has for Mephibosheth, because that's what David had for Jonathan. And the first thing we see when it comes to covenant love is this. Covenant love makes the helpless secure. It makes the helpless secure. You know, it's mentioned twice in our passage that Mephibosheth is disabled. He's crippled in his feet. He actually wasn't born that way. 2 Samuel tells us that when he was 5 years old, when King Saul and Jonathan both died on the battlefield, his nurse, his nanny basically, picked him up and was in such a hurry to run away because basically their royal house was ruined. And she was running in such haste that she dropped him when he was 5 years old, presumably from a great height, and that's how he got crippled. That's how he got lame in both his feet. And this passage mentions it. It probably stood out to you, right? Like at the very end of the chapter, it says it again, right? Remember, now he was lame in both feet. And I do think it's telling us this to remind us and make it very clear that Mephibosheth was not a threat to David. David was not afraid of Mephibosheth at all, like, oh, he might be a potential enemy to me. He couldn't really do much. He was helpless. He was even dependent on someone else for everything. Ziba, this servant, this steward of Saul's house. And look what Mephibosheth says about himself. What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? He calls himself a dead dog. It's a way of saying, I'm nothing. I'm a nobody, right? I mean, what good is a dead dog? right? They can literally do nothing. They're a stench. You got to call animal control and get them to take them away, right? It's a sad thing as well. And basically, this is a phrase that people use to kind of self-abasement, to say, I'm nothing, I'm nobody. You know, King David, before he was king, actually said this once too. Long time ago, when King Saul was pursuing him, chasing after him to kill him, King David said it too. He said, why are you trying to kill me, a dead dog such as I? I'm too small for you to hate so much. Like, you're punching down King Saul. Why are you going after me? That's what King David said when he called himself a dead dog. On the flip side, Mephibosheth, he's saying, why are you blessing me so much, a dead dog such as I? I'm too small to love this much. Basically, King David, you don't owe me anything. And David makes clear it's these promises that were made that leads to this kind of love, this kind of blessing, this kind of favor, this kind of mercy, because covenants were made. And it's covenantal love that makes weak, helpless, dead dogs of a man like Mephibosheth and puts them into a very secure position. Not only is he spared, but we remember he gets to eat at the king's table. You know, promises, as long as you intend to actually keep them, promises are a very powerful thing. Of course, in modern culture, the most common place we see covenantal promises like these is in wedding vows. Right? We witness them. Anytime you go to a wedding, you are witnessing covenantal promises. Here's what Tim Keller and Jeffrey White in their premarital counseling handbook writes about promises. What a promise does is to create an oasis of predictability in a completely unpredictable world. It brings with it a security that is necessary for a relationship to truly flourish. Actually, when you make a promise, you are in a state where you are your most free, here's the interesting part, and your most human. How so? Well, animals can't make promises. Everything they do occurs by instinct. If their hormones tell them to mate, they mate. If their hormones tell them to migrate, they migrate. The person who sticks by a promise, even when it hurts, demonstrates that they have the capacity for faithfulness. Maybe you can even say chesed, right? It is an act of moral courage. Such a person is truly free. Promises are powerful. Promises are special. Let us not degrade promises such as these. And, you know, another place we see promises like this, we don't see covenantal vows being made too often, but another place commonly that I think that you and I get to see it is in church vows, right? When someone becomes a new member, someone gets baptized, someone gets confirmed, they come up to the front, they raise their right hand, and they make these promises. They make these vows. And basically, what's the point of that? We're saying these are serious things. These are important things. And we make these promises because we don't want feelings and circumstances to dictate how we live out these commitments. When we make promises like this, be it wedding vows, be it church vows, we're saying, I know how hard it is to keep promises. I know that my feelings can easily change. I know circumstances can make things hard, but I want to stick to this. I want to have hesed. I want to be committed. I want to be faithful. I want to be steadfast. So I make these promises, even before all these people. Of course, with church membership, don't get me wrong, guys. Church membership, when you make those promises, if you become a member of Kindred one day, it's not like marriage vows. You can transfer it. You can transfer it to somebody else, to another church, rather. You could leave Kindred sometime. It's fine. But what you cannot do, or what you should not do, is leave your commitment to Christ. Or if you're a parent making vows during the infant baptism, what you cannot do is leave your commitment to your children. And it's true for marriage vows, it's true for church vows, it's true for David's vows to Jonathan, that all of us, we get the power to make and keep promises as huge as these because we've learned it. We've learned it from God himself. Look what David says in verse 3. Maybe you notice this. He reiterates the word chesed here, but he says, that I may show the kindness of God to him. That I may show the chesed of God to him. God is the originator of chesed. He is the inventor of chesed. He is a God of promise. He is a God who keeps his promises. He is a God who takes dead dogs and brings them to the king's table. He is a God who makes the helpless secure through his covenant love. I'm reminded of Psalm 23, verse 5, a very famous psalm where King David, presumably the psalmist King David says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. It's a beautiful image. You prepare a table before me. But remember, how does Psalm 23 begin? The Lord is my shepherd. We are like sheep. We are like helpless animals. I know in this day and age, you call someone a sheep, it's kind of derogatory, right? I remember I kind of made fun of, jabbed at a little bit, people who bought a certain item through social media advertisements, and one brother, humbly, jokingly came up to me and said, I know I'm a sheep, right? And it's like, hey, it's all good. It's all good. You could buy those things. It's fine. No one likes to be called sheep. But Psalm 23 is basically admitting, I'm a sheep. I'm a helpless sheep. The Lord is my shepherd. But the crazy part is, but he brings me to his table. He brings me to his feast. What kind of shepherd brings a sheep to their dinner table? Or any animal for that matter? Any farm or barn animal. The good shepherd does. And the good shepherd even lays his life down for the sheep. Romans 5:6 tells us, for while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. The king looked at Mephibosheth and he saw Jonathan. And so he loved him and was faithful to him. For all of us who put our faith in Jesus Christ, the king looks at you and he sees Jesus. And therefore he is loving towards you and faithful towards you. And remember this from Romans 5:6. Jesus didn't die after you got strong. Jesus didn't die for you after you became faithful, after you became a little more presentable. It says, while we were still weak, he died for the dead dogs. He died for the weak. He died for the helpless. And the big question for you and me today is, can we at least admit that we are indeed helpless? Can we admit that we are weak? Sometimes I think what hurts our pride more than being told we are sinners, is being told we are unable. We are unable to cleanse ourselves. We are unable to redeem, restore ourselves. That we need someone else to do it. But it's precisely when we admit that God's covenant love makes the helpless secure. It's when we can admit that when true change comes. And that leads us to our next point. Covenant love makes the helpless secure, but it also makes the enemy faithful. Covenant love makes the enemy faithful. You know, our default state is antagonistic to God. That's just the reality. Our default state doesn't want to follow God, doesn't want to obey God, doesn't want to trust God. By default, we're not only helpless, but we're enemies of God. You know, Mephibosheth, he was only an enemy of God in his clan affiliation, right? Like because he was the grandson of Saul. But you and I, because of sin, we are enemies of God through and through. But covenant love changes all that. You know what? The thing I love about the story of Mephibosheth is actually its ending. We actually didn't read the ending because the ending comes 10 chapters later. It's really powerful, I think. In 2 Samuel 19, fast forwarding a little bit, spoiler alerts here, of course. King David actually winds up in hard times again. His reign is never easy. And he is on the run once again, this time not from his father-in-law Saul, who's now dead, but from his own son. And so he's in a weak position, he's in a vulnerable position, and remember Ziba, that steward, the one who was supposed to take care of Mephibosheth? He takes advantage, and he deceives both David and Mephibosheth, and he gets David to actually believe that Mephibosheth is not loyal to David. And so David gives all that land, remember all that blessing and gift? He gives it to Ziba instead. What a betrayal, right? But Mephibosheth, he eventually makes his way. Remember, he can't walk, right? So even just getting to David is a trek for him. It's a journey for him. It takes so much for him just to get to David, for him to plead his case. And the way he pleads his case really reveals so much of his loyalty and his heart towards David. I love this. In verses 28 and 30 of chapter 19, Mephibosheth says basically, King David, you could still kill me if you want. You can. He says, for all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I, then, to cry to the king? I have no rights. You don't owe me anything. Once again, that's what he's saying. You don't owe me anything. And the king said to him, why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided. You and Ziba shall divide the land. If you think about it carefully, though, if David really believes Mephibosheth, this is a poor judgment, right? This is a poor decision. It's a very passive kind of political decision, not a righteous one, right? But here's the kicker. And Mephibosheth said to the king, oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home. Here's Mephibosheth saying, I don't care about the land. That's not why I'm saying this to you. Ziba, have it all, right? I don't care about the land. I don't care about the property. I don't care even about my life, really. I'm just happy that you, my king, are safe. And I just want you to know the truth, that I never was disloyal to you. That's all he wants. That's all he wants. Mephibosheth, he isn't ruled by fear. He isn't ruled by a desire for gain. He is ruled by a changed heart. He is ruled by a faithfulness to David that only came about, not because David forced him and made him afraid of him, but because he showed him covenant love. And now Mephibosheth simply loves him back. He's not controlled, he's compelled by covenant love. That is what happens to dead dogs at a king's table. I watched a movie recently. I'm about to share a spoiler of that movie, so I won't say the name of the movie. But maybe you won't even watch it anyway, so it's okay. But in this movie, the villain in the story says this one line near the end of the movie. This is why it's a spoiler. It's at the very end. He says, I know what the one true religion is. The one true religion is control. And of course, what he means by that is every religion basically just exists to control people. And I when I heard that line, I was like, I get it. I get why someone might say that. I understand that sentiment. I get why someone might agree with that character, even though he's the villain. Maybe you've had people in your life try to use religion to control you. I've certainly experienced that, thankfully in a very mild way, thankfully. And of course, for those of you who are parents, there is always the temptation to use God and the Bible and Jesus to control your kids, to control their behavior. We got to just admit that, right? But please know, dear parents, and future parents too, if you try to use Christ to control your kids will ultimately learn to use Christ too. Not love him, not be loyal to him. I love the refrain of the counselor Ted Tripp from his book, actually books, Shepherding a Child's Heart and Instructing a Child's Heart. I actually need to read those again because I remember how good they were. I love his refrain throughout those books that a parent's job isn't just to change a child's behavior, but to instruct and shepherd their hearts by the grace of God. Because when you focus on behavior, right, which is just on the outside, right, what you're doing on the outside, you're ultimately pointing your kids to religion as control. But when you focus on the hearts of your children, you're ultimately pointing your kids to the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, the gospel is truly antithetical to that statement from that movie. Religion is just all about control. Because it's not about control. The gospel of Jesus Christ, yes, it produces effects, right? It produces the same effect as what happened to Mephibosheth. Covenant love, not control, is what makes an enemy truly, genuinely, sincerely, not just on the outside, sincerely faithful. Think about what the gospel says. The gospel doesn't use fear. The gospel doesn't use shame to produce results. The gospel says, because of what someone else did, the promises are already fulfilled. Because of what someone else did, the covenant is already upheld. Because Jesus lived the perfect life in your place. Because Jesus paid your penalty on the cross. And because he rose again to give you new life, there's nothing more you can do to make God love you more. There's nothing more you can do to make him accept you more. It is finished. You are truly secure in Jesus Christ. You know, if you want to control someone, you don't tell them that. You tell them, unless you do all these things, your place in heaven, your place in the family of God is very precarious. Your standing before God is in question if you don't do the things I say. That's how you control somebody. That's how you control people. Christianity done right doesn't produce controlled people. It produces changed people. But genuine, deep, from the inside out heart change is a process, right? It usually takes a long time. It usually takes your whole life. Like the reformer Martin Luther once said, all of life is repentance. On the flip side, when you use religion to control, you can actually change a lot. You can change really fast, even. But probably only on the outside. Probably just your behavior, not the heart. Control certainly produces results. You know, anytime you see a religious community and you're like, wow, they are just so well behaved. They are so disciplined. They are so clean. No messiness whatsoever, at least on the outside. You got to ask yourself, at what cost? At what cost did they become like this? How much of these results were produced by control? How much of these results were produced by genuine heart change? I'm not saying the answer is always going to be control. Right? I think by the grace of God, there are some awesome religious communities out there. But it is a healthy question to ask. Now, some of you might be thinking, but Pastor, you know, sometimes you talk about things like church discipline, you know, or even just broadly, you talk about accountability. Churches love talking about accountability. Aren't those things just a way to control people too at the end of the day? And to that, I would say, it's not designed to be. If done poorly, it can be a way to control people. Anything done poorly when it comes to the Bible or the gospel even, if done poorly, if done unfaithfully, can be used to control people. But it's not designed to be. Things like accountability or even church discipline is designed to help me follow Christ. Simple as that. Not because I want to be controlled, but because I want to be compelled by God's covenant love. I want accountability. I want someone, a greater body, to have authority over me. In fact, I do. It's called the Presbytery, the North America Presbytery West. They're in place. They have authority over me. They will put me under discipline if I ever go astray. And I want that. Not because I want anyone to control me. I'm very American. I love my freedom. But I want that because it's a form of self-control. I want accountability and someone to have authority over me. I don't want to be a lone ranger. I don't want to be I just do everything on my own way all the time. I choose that because I need accountability, because I need my brothers and sisters to help me love and follow Jesus. And if you're compelled by the love of Christ, you will want that too. But let me tell you right now, if you are not compelled by the covenant love of God, please don't feel like you need to do anything. If you are not today compelled by the love of Christ, please don't feel like you have to do something for God or do something for the church. Because we want changed hearts. We don't want just outward behavior. And at the end of the day, if you live long enough, you know, you can't control anyone's heart. We know it's God who changes hearts. Because it's God who wants your heart. He doesn't want your outward behavior. And he will change it by his covenant love. It makes the helpless secure. It makes the enemy faithful. And so today, as we look forward to 2025, I ask all of you, my dear friends, my brothers and sisters, look to Christ. Look to his covenant-fulfilling, promise-keeping love, demonstrated especially on the cross. And would you be compelled? We are all like Mephibosheth. We are all Mephibosheth. And praise be to God that in Christ we get to eat and drink at the King's table. Let's pray. Would you come before God now as you look forward to this year? Perhaps for some of you, you're just, it's not even the year you're thinking about. You're just thinking about today. You're thinking about this week. You're thinking about this month. But would you cherish the fact that though we are like Mephibosheth, we also get treated like Mephibosheth, even better than Mephibosheth? Would you come to the Lord now, relishing that as you prepare to eat from the Lord's table, the King's table? Would you cherish the reality that you've been loved with this chesed love from God? And would you ask God, what should that mean for me? Not out of control or fear or guilt or shame, but what should that mean for me because I am moved by that love? Come to him now. Come freely to him now. And after some time, we will come to the Lord's table.